So my views on stamp duty. So we are about, or stamp duty changes. We're about a week after the news got leaked. I say leaked, got released into the press that there are going to be some changes in this space. And I initially was fairly favourable in terms of what may or may not happen, just because I want to see the market move. I want to see people at the top being able to sell their properties or be incentivized to sell their properties to support families and other people living in them. There is no point the over 65 generation living in huge 5 bed houses that are not lived in when you've got plenty of families across the UK that could benefit from that type of property. Now, when I look at the stats of who this £500,000 limit or target is going to have a big impact on, it's mainly going to be the southeast, southwest of the UK. So 30% of homes in England are priced over 500 grand. Of that, in London, 59% of homes are above the 500k mark, whereas it's just 8% in the northeast. So there is going to be a massive divide in this space. Who's it going to benefit? Well, first-time buyers might benefit from shifted tax burden. Sellers could potentially then increase prices because they're going to want to offset if they are paying any additional taxes, offset those, and the top end of the market just becomes stagnant, which yes, many people may say, great, it doesn't need to move, but ultimately it's a trickle down effect. You want the top being as busy as the bottom, because it all basically uh, interconnects as you go up the ladder, and you need all levels of the property market firing on all cylinders. Now, if stamp duty does change, I have mixed feelings about it. It's unquestionably, as I said, going to slow the south and the top end of the market down. Sales above the 500k mark will likely, come to a halt pretty quickly, which isn't good news for any of us. There's going to be a load of people also sat on potential growth. So they may have bought a property 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago for £100,000. That property could, let's say, now worth £700,000, 800,000. So they've got massive paper gains potentially made there. What they are going to do with that, who knows? They're not going to be incentivized to sell it. So what they'll likely do, and if it was me, it would be to pull out the equity through the form of a mortgage or debt, and then be able to manage that at 3-4% as opposed to paying basically double tax in terms of capital gains and then potentially inheritance tax if they look to pass that on to their kids. So it will be interesting to see what happens in that space. The other things I think we need to look at is the massive divide it will have on the market. Obviously, if you go up north and you look at those cheaper end of the market, potentially in the short term, it's going to be great. There's going to be a bounce in pricing. A lot of what stops people acquiring properties in that part or in those parts of the country are that initial outlay of capital that they need. So if there's no stamp duty, then great. It's going to be easier to access the market, and that ultimately that stamp duty saving, some of that is going to be passed on to the cost of the purchase. So there's going to be a bit of a bump in terms of um, prices there, just because the lower cost of entry is going to bring more people to the table, which ultimately is a good thing. But then when we look at a property levy on ownership, what does that mean for landlords? Well, ultimately, I think, which is what always happens within this space, is landlords are going to pass any costs on to the tenant. So ultimately, the government is trying to protect people from overpaying rents and tenancies. Ultimately, they should just allow people to build more houses and speed up the planning permissions, but that's a whole nother topic. But ultimately, in this instance, I just think costs are going to end up being pushed on to tenants, and you're going to see a massive bump in terms of cost of rentals and what's happening in that space, which again isn't protecting the people they ultimately want to. Now, who knows whether that will be a short term fix or a longer term one, but I do see that being a big factor in this space. So really, what is going to happen? Well, currently 85% of property transactions are below the 500k mark. So ultimately, this is probably going to land pretty well for the majority of people in the market. And it's not going to be necessarily viewed or deemed as a bad negative thing. But looking further down the line, I just think it's going to catch up with everyone eventually. And as I said at the start, we need the top end of the market to be promoting the bottom end of the market, and vice versa. So my views on it, not necessarily too positive, but I would add are Labour going to be in this time in 4 years' time? Are they likely to get re-elected? Who knows? So I would say that the chance of the vast majority of these changes getting through Parliament and being actually presented into the wider market are lower on the scale of things. I do think there needs to be a reform, and it should be a sort of a cross-party reform, and in an ideal world everyone would come down, sit together and put a decent plan together, because ultimately we want to be in a situation where we are driving growth and driving people to be able to transact a bit more like our American friends across the pond. They work in a far more transactional market because the market dictates that they can do that. They don't have the cost of entry and exit like we do here with stamp duties, etc., and the taxes on those purchases. And ultimately, we want to get to a similar position to that. So yes, we will watch the space. We'll keep everyone updated, but my take is very much mixed at the moment. Good in that it will drive prices for a number of my landlords in the north. Bad that the south is going to be, yeah, not very well looked after in this situation. But time will tell. We will keep everyone posted on these updates.